Hey everyone, and welcome back to the HR in Action podcast. Today's guest is Russell Lookadoo. He is the president of H Architecture and the HR guy for small business. And so I'm looking forward to chatting with him. We've already had a couple really good discussions and getting into different aspects of leadership and performance and psychology. And so we'll see where the conversation goes, but start off as we typically do. Russell, if you don't mind giving a little introduction and introducing yourself, and we'll go from there.
Happy to do so. Thank you for having me, Aaron. Looking forward to our conversation. As you said, our previous meetings, we've really begun to dive deep into motivational theory and what moves people. I'm the president of H Architecture, a firm I founded in 2005, focusing on being the HR guy for small business. So what I find is most small business owners, when they start their business, it's because they have something they love to do. I don't know anybody. Well, I have one client who started a business selling grocery bags and pricing guns and things like that. It wasn't a passion of his to sell pricing guns, but we turned it into a passion for making sure retailers had what they needed to serve their customers. But I started in HR a long time ago. I'm old. Ronald Reagan was president. And I worked for a small manufacturing company that went out of business because of very, very poor strategic planning. They kept finding market segments that were dying. I can go into great detail if you're interested, but then I went to work for the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, in city government. That's when at this previous manufacturer, I got involved in a job classification system and was charged with running the performance evaluation system for our non-union employees. When I went to work for the city of Charlotte, I learned everything not to do in business working for the government. So I left after a couple of years. Some funny stories there, but I left after a couple of years and worked for 3 different Fortune 500 companies in compensation, really focusing on reward mechanisms. I used to be responsible for the incentive plans for the entire general bank, one of the 4th largest bank in the country. Then I went to what is now the 2nd largest bank in the country and got really focused on compensation and motivation, because I have a belief that you can talk about performance without talking about pay. And that's a key developmental thing. You want to talk about people's growth, their strengths, their weaknesses, and not cloud it with pay. But I also believe that you don't talk about pay without talking about the underlying performance, good or bad. So when I started my own business in the last place I worked for, I completely revamped the performance management system, performance evaluation system. And I changed it to more of a performance management system with 16,000 employees. And I put in an online tool in the early 2000s to do performance evaluations. And we started doing them twice a year instead of once a year. I like 3 to 4 times a year, so that you're managing performance, not calling the question and saying you did good or bad, because people thrive on different things, pay not being a key driver. People think it's the number one driver, but it usually isn't. Now, so in 2005, I changed my life, started my own business, and really focused on those small business owners. As I said, they start their business when they're around a passion, usually. Then they get successful. They're out of capacity. They're working 60, 70 hours a week. And I know, Aaron, you've started a couple firms. You know how that is. And then they start hiring. And unfortunately, that's when the complexity and the headaches. What do? I had a client call me yesterday, hired a salesperson in July. Hadn't sold anything in 7 months. What do you do? So I deal with those kind of issues for small business owners who don't have 3/4 of HR, like the Fortune 500 companies do. At one of my Fortune 500 companies, I think there were 400 people in human resources. Most of my clients have fewer than 100 people. So they do the HR in the margin, or they have their office manager, their bookkeeper, try to be compliant and do the right things, and not at all being progressive about it. So that's the niche I try to fill, is the advisor to those business owners. Probably a long-winded answer, but that kind of helps you get where I am.
No, that's great. And I got so many different things I want to dig into on that and the performance and the money thing. I think maybe we start off just with from where you kind of ended with that example. I'm just so curious to hear in that situation because my gut came right back out and said the first thing I would ask him is, well, what have you done over these 7 months to communicate with them, set expectations, set goals, right? And I gotta think. I imagine probably not a lot of communication happened. Can you talk more about that story at all?
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's a small business that's owned by a Russian immigrant. His English is functional, but he has a small team and they're really focused on what they do. They didn't have time to grow the business, so we hired somebody, a salesperson. And I don't work with him as frequently as I'd like to, but you're right. I don't know if they laid out what you need to do, when you need to do it, what are the numbers, what are the expectations. I came up with a thing in the shower a couple of years ago about EIEIO. Now, what does that make you think about?
Okay.
What is
Uh, Old McDonald's.
Old McDonald? But the Old McDonald had a farm. EIEIO is how I teach setting expectations. E, expect, I, inspect, expect, inspect, and then operate. EIEIO. Because unless you have clearly set the expectations, people do what they think they're doing the right thing. If you don't inspect it, provide feedback. I love the story of how the word feedback came about, but I don't believe he did any of this. He is, like many small business owners, self-motivated, intrinsically motivated. They want to do what they do,
Right.
and nobody has to tell them what to do. Partially,
Right.
they're the bacon in the breakfast, not the eggs, right? They're all in. But he probably said, all right, go sell. Nothing happened. Signed him up for a couple networking groups, paid for memberships in Chamber of Commerce. 7 months, no lead. So my first question to him was, have you told him that you're frustrated? Well, we meet every
Right.
week. Have you clearly laid out that you're
Yeah.
frustrated and that there needs to be a change? So I've got a process, I call it adult performance management as opposed to parent-child.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, the guy's in a protected class, so we have to be a little careful. He's over 40. That tomorrow in your meeting, which is today, lay down clear expectations. He must provide X number of appointments to you in February, or you're at a crossroads. And tell him right now he's got 30 days to straighten up or fly right or decide to change companies.
Yeah.
So we'll see
So,
what.
and I would just throw out one other thing, if you're open to considering it, but I would ask him, how do you think you're doing, right? Set the baseline to find out what's going on in that guy's head is like this, because if he realizes he's not, oh man, it's been 7 months, I haven't made a sale. I know I'm not, meeting your expectations. That makes it a lot easier conversation than assuming one way or another. But if you say, how do you think things are going? Oh, I think they're really good. I'm really making progress. I'm so close to a bunch of deals, and it's like, oh well, I think we're a little off here in our conversations and expectations. Let me re-baseline here.
But it was
But
interesting, given
um,
our conversations, is he's on a commission plan with a threshold, and he hasn't earned
sure.
any commission in 6 months. So obviously, money's not a driver for him.
Right, right. Well, he's getting some salary too, I assume then, right?
He's
It's a
getting he's
partial,
getting a
it's not
salary.
full commission.
No, no,
Yeah,
the type of sales it is, full commission would not work. You know,
yeah,
there's not a
yeah,
strong
yeah,
line
yeah.
of
No, that's
not a cycle,
it's
a
such a
lot of reasons.
it's such a classic it's such a classic situation. I think it happens all the time, those kind of things, right? And
Yeah.
if you let them fester, but I think that's the expectations or expect inspect. I think that's great because we say in the government where I work all the time is people don't do what you expect, they do what you inspect,
Yes.
right? But there's also this thing you can't just micromanage people and just constantly, you know, work over their shoulder inspecting them. You set expectations, give them autonomy to do what they need to do so they understand what those expectations are, but there's still an accountability so that they can take ownership of it to know and track how they're doing over time, which is the inspection, not so much from a I'm auditing you, but more from a we're tracking, right? We can track this and together know whether we're making progress or not.
And one of the things I coach my clients on is your goal as a leader is to make your team successful. That's the only reason you hired them, is so they're successful and you don't have to do everything they do. You can free up to 80% of your time by properly delegating, expecting and inspecting, and polishing at the end. It's a bell curve. Spend 10% of your time setting expectations, clarifying. I have 4 questions, Aaron, that I teach when you're delegating. And the first one is, do you understand exactly what I expect? And the answer is yes or no. If it's no, you continue to make sure it's clear what, when, how much, quality. Then the second question is, do you have what you need to be successful? Do you have the training, the information, the access to tools? I never get stuff into the CRM because I've never been trained on the CRM. Okay, well, let's train you on the CRM so I can see your progress.
Yep.
The third one is you understand that you're responsible for doing this, not the royal we. You have to bring the appointments to the table. I'm not going to do it. That's why I hired you. And what's your next step? Those are the 4 delegation questions you do in that first 10%. 80% you let them go. You don't micromanage them. They're adults. Then 10% of the time you're checking results, you're checking quality, you're polishing results, and you're moving on to the goal setting for the next period. So it all flows together. But if you think they are going to do that, they meaning the employees, entrepreneurs don't get it. They don't get why people don't think like they do. And there's a reason only 2% of this country own their own businesses.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And that's I think working with owners is sort of that's a very niche thing. Most people in organizations aren't necessarily dealing with that, but it's people that start companies. I think in general, they're visionaries, right? They have this long-term goal. They're very self-motivated. They're highly risk-taking, and they've got it all in their head. But that what that means is they tend to make assumptions about that everyone else is sort of in the same way, right? And on the same. So, hey, I told you to do sales. Usually owners are very direct, so they're not going to give a lot of details. It's like, hey, you're here to sell, go sell. And they expect they do it. And if they need help, they're going to ask. And that's not the reality of most people. And especially because they're not in the same, in your head. And they don't necessarily understand that vision, why it's so important to communicate and be open and transparent.
Well, I started my own business because I didn't want to be babysat. I didn't want a boss micromanaging me. I was at a Christmas dinner, and one of my family members I was complaining about my boss, and she said, "You have a hard time working for other people." And I said, "Yeah, I did." And the last 20 some years have been fantastic because I answer to myself, and I have that motivation. But if I were to hire people, they don't have that. They don't come with that DNA.
Right.
And it's that assumption, most dangerous word you can make in leadership, is prevalent. Well, why don't they just do it? I would. Well, they're not you.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's where it gets into, what it means to be a good leader is understanding yourself, but then understanding others and being able to recognize the differences and how you adapt your own approach and communication. But I had an old boss that I think it was his coach that told him this or something. But when he was first taken over, and he came in, he said, there's 3 key factors to being a good leader. The first is communication. The second is communication, and the third is communication.
Absolutely.
And it's just continuing to whether that's expectations, goals, the vision, the task, whatever. It's just, being open and communicating, I think, is so key. But it's hard when you're busy running around trying to get everything done.
And that's when they start hiring people. They can't do it all. But to get them out of the doing mode,
Right.
I use a 3-part pie chart a lot of times, that when you are a implementer, you have like 5% planning, 90% execution, and 10% communication. If you're a middle manager, it's more like a third, a third, a third. But in a senior management position, it's like 30% planning, 10% execution, and the other is all communication. It's the lubricant of business.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, that reminds me, there's a book called Barbarians to Bureaucrats. I don't
Mm.
know if you've read that. It's
Ah,
it's it's an older book, probably 70s or 80s even, but I mean, the concepts haven't changed. I'm gonna write that down. Um, the concepts haven't changed, and there's another guy that has a similar book, but it talks about the phases of a company, right? And you start out in this visionary phase, which is really the owner, right? And it's a very hub and spoke um, sort of operation mentality. You got the owner that's got it all. They're the one that's got the vision and is running everything, and everyone kind of reports into them. And then as you grow, the company starts to, get more complex, and you have to delegate that down, right, to other leaders that are taking on ownership. And the key is to kind of stay in that operation mode without starting to get into the bureaucracy side, where you start creating process and efficiencies in a way that's, you know you're creating process for the sake of process instead of for the sake of the mission or the vision or whatever. So there's
right.
this kind of sweet spot in of being efficient and having process and having communication and delegation without going, over to that bureaucratic side. And ultimately, that can, you can either get pulled back or you can, go into sort of expiration. But it's an interesting, I think, way of looking at company life cycle.
Yeah, entrepreneurs tend to be visionary and tend to be about the results. They start at the results. This is the world I want to see. This is the change I want to make. Get me there. And they
Yep.
don't ever get the right people to get me there. You always have that other partner in the great success stories that do all the implementation work for the visionary. And if they don't have an
Sure.
implementer on their leadership team, how many have you heard the term serial entrepreneurs? They start a company, it fails. They start a company, it fails. They start a company,
Yeah.
it fails. They start a company, it fails. Kind of like the kid pulling the string on the lawnmower. Zing, 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 zing. And then about the 12th pull, it catches. And usually when that happens, they've decided they need somebody, CFO, COO, something like that in their company who's going to implement, set the expectations, do the people management, because they don't want to be tied down with that.
Sure.
Or they're implementers and never have a vision, and they struggle with why is this company even doing it. So that's your 10 your founder prototypes. Most of my clients in small business are actually, if they are paired with a vision, they really succeed in the implementation stage, but then they get the challenge of getting people fired up and aligned and what's the term, engaged in their business as opposed to
Mhm.
coming in as a transaction.
Right. 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 Yeah. Um, no, it's an interesting world with the startup, and now that I've, got a company and, kind of trying to learn from all those lessons, right? And there's so many books and theories and models. Um, and I don't think you ever get it perfect, but there's there's definitely, like, you don't want to live in your own head, um, but you got to get stuff done. And
Yeah.
yeah. Well, so how about you mentioned like performance management stuff? Is that ongoing right now with any clients? Do you have any good stories in that area or any hot topics right now that you've been working through?
It's a thing that small business owners, again, don't see a strong need for until there's a problem. Because I often get calls when there's a problem. They're ready to terminate somebody. They've terminated somebody and got a suit. And the fix is proper performance management, even if there's never an evaluation. You know, going
Yeah.
back to the last corporate world I worked in, I'll always remember second or third day on the job. Now, this was a regional supermarket chain, 16,000, 17,000 employees, 155 locations. They just hired a new operations head about 2 or 3 weeks before I started. And he called me into his office. I was on day 2 or 3. And there was this massive stack of performance evaluation forms on his desk, probably 2.5, 3 feet tall. Because all his
Oh
store
my gosh.
managers got evaluated, right? And he said, "Do you see that stack?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "They're garbage." And he literally dramatically knocked them off his desk all over the floor. He said, "They're garbage. Fix them." That was my challenge. And I said, "Well, tell me what's wrong." He said, "Our number one concern in the grocery business was waste. Now, if you're not familiar with the grocery business, that's theft, that's breakage, that's spoilage. Those are the three main reasons you have waste. And waste is 100% comes out of profit, 100%. And we were running about 4.5% waste of percentage of sales. Our margin was only about 2.5%. So we
I
were
was going to say grocery stores are classically low margin. You know, they're probably one of the only industries lower than the government business services business that I'm in that has lower margins.
So he said, I pulled up, I had my admin stack them high to low. And the first three I looked at in their top overall rating were terrible in waste. So I said, well, let me look at it. So I took the evaluation form. I'd really never looked at it. Had 24 factors, 24 things they were rated on. Now, I saw your expression. That's nuts. And I went back to the COO and I said, your problem is that waste is your most important factor, but it's tied for last with 23 other items. Because they weren't weighted, they weren't prioritized, they weren't filtered, there wasn't any focus whatsoever. So I borrowed from Norton and Kaplan the balanced scorecard, and I created a thing called the balanced scorecard. A little play on words. I'm good at those. I love play on words.
I like it.
It's architecture. So we put in a balanced scorecard that says, let's talk about people, premises, product, and customer service. Couldn't come up with an alliterative one for that. So I wanted to be people, so they're not customers. And go ahead, people, how you manage your staff, what are your store conditions, and how's your product, and then customer service, which was overriding. I said, now, Ron, you got $100 to spend. Spend them on each of those categories. Prioritize those by percentages. And he said, obviously, product. We got to get our waste down. Great. I said, let's put 60 of the $100 on product. You got $40 to spend on the other three. And it was a really tough call. But by creating those priorities, and then we had 2 or 3 sub-measures under each of those categories, no more than 7. After we put this in, and I wasn't the only person who thought this up, I got a committee, store managers, operations people, and we said, these are the key things. Over 2 years, our waste went from 4.5% to under 2%. So we cut waste by almost 75%. Profitability doubled just on that one change. Now, it wasn't the only thing that was going on. I don't take full credit for that. But it taught me that when you give people clear focus on what you expect and you inspect that clear focus, you get results because people inherently want to be successful.
Oh yeah, no, I mean the power of communication, setting goals, priorities. You know, what is it? It's a cliche, right? If everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority.
Right. So you should have seen his face. I said, well, that's tied last with 23 other items.
That's a great way to put it. I love that. Yeah. You've just, that's tied last. What is it? Ricky Bobby, right? If you're not first, you're last.
Yeah. Ricky Bobby, or what's the guy's name in Dumb and Dumber says, oh, is there 1 in a million chance you'd go out with me? And he says, there's a chance, there's a chance.
That's a great line. Yeah. So, and when you were talking about the clients don't usually come to you when things are going good, they come when there's a problem. And we have this, I was actually just talking about this morning is my business partner, Jimmy, uses this analogy a lot where we talk about our services are more like a vitamin than a pain pill, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're offering a vitamin as opposed to ibuprofen. Now we can offer ibuprofen, but there's not a lot you can do once the problem hits. And so it's kind of like, oh, you've got a problem. Well, have you been taking your vitamins for the last 7 months? Have you been setting expectations, tracking measures and communicating openly with everyone so that now that there's a problem, you can go in there and say, hey, remember when we talked about this for the last 3 months in a row and I said that this wasn't where we needed to be and we needed to improve and this, that, and the other? Like, no, probably not. So you are where you are.
And I like looking at proactive because a lot of people face performance management, which is different than evaluation. Evaluation's not the goal. It's to manage performance to where people are successful. But they get what I call blank page syndrome. They want me to write for them. What do I need to say? And that's what I did yesterday with this client. I said, here's your talking notes for your meeting tomorrow. And then I want you to summarize what you talked about and send it to him on an adult level conversation so that it's clearly communicated. I use a thing I read another source called same day summaries. When you coach somebody, you follow it up with a same day summary. This is what we talked about. Here's what we agreed upon. Here's what you're going to change. Did I miss or misstate anything? And that's key. You close it off with that sentence. Did I miss or misstate anything from our conversation? Send the email. They will either no, I've got it, or no, here's a question. They will always respond when you ask for a question to close an email. It's a great communication technique. You end it with a period, you get a period. You end it with a question, you get an answer. And that actually stands up in court as documented warning without calling it a warning in the conversation with this other adult. We're not junior high, middle school principals. I spend enough time in the principal's office that I don't ever want to go there. So if you communicate as an adult, Aaron, this is what we talked about. These are the issues. Here's the incident, specific pattern of performance, the impact of that. Here's what you agreed to do to change. Did I miss or misstate anything? And they respond back, no, I understand. You're got the first turn of the corner. Now, what I really liked about Proactor is that it gives you an opportunity to practice. And I know we're not here to sell the product, but I was really impressed because you can have an interactive conversation as if, in practice setting, is the way I understand it. And so that gets them over the phobia of having the conversation, hopefully.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say that doesn't just apply to emails. That's like in verbal conversation as well. Is how do you know if somebody feels understood? Well, ask them.
Yeah.
And that's like when we talk about active listening, we have there's 5 micro behaviors.
Right.
You attend to nonverbals, so you want to be aware of what they're doing, but and you ask open-ended questions. You reflect feelings, but you paraphrase and you summarize.
Right.
And that's because the whole point of active listening is to have empathy and understand and feel what the person is feeling and create that mutual understanding. Do not only you understand, but do they believe you understand? Because if they don't believe you understand, then you're never going to be able to make it into a problem-solving facilitation and actually get to a solution, because they're just going to keep circling back to not being understood. And it's, Covey, I love Covey. He says it's like not having air, right?
Yeah.
You're not motivated by air unless you don't have it. And you're not motivated by being understood unless you don't have it. And if you don't have it, that's all you want, and you can't get past that. And so, so that's a great, trick, I guess, or skill, technique, I suppose would be the word. When you're finishing a conversation or just even a thought, is like, did I get that right? Or, do you feel like I'm understanding where you're coming from? Or do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying here in my expectations?
Don't you get it? You don't want to come out like that principal. You don't want to slam people. You don't. You've seen the transactional analysis model, I'm sure. The adult's where you want to be. But when you go parent, they go child.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
You want to pull them back into adult by you going back into an adult. But the minute you get demonstrative or slam your fist on the table or I'm going to write you up, boom, they're going to go rebellious child, not open to learn child, because they're in a defensive mode and they don't want to be talked down to like I was in 7th grade again.
That's the psychological needs.
Yeah. Conversely, the manager doesn't want to be me. I have 2 key principles about managing people. One, you hired the right person. You have a robust hiring process, fully vet people before you bring them on board, including sometimes internships or trial assignments, for example. So you hired the right person. So you've got the right body. Now, number 2, everybody wants to be successful. People have an inherent tribal need to be accepted into the tribe. That's how we survived back in the San.
That's relatedness. That's the basic need.
Absolutely. And the way you achieve relatedness is you satisfy people's requests. You're successful. Now that's external motivation, and affirmation. But internal motivation, you want to be proud of yourself. Intrinsically, you want to be successful, see yourself as successful. A lot of coaching I do is people who feel like they're failing. So
that's competence. That's competence.
Yes, I like that phrase. Yeah, And so if you hire the right people and they want to be successful, you're going to get along just fine. But you still have to set those expectations clearly.
Yeah, yeah. No, so what you're talking, that imbalance is, that's the psychological needs, right? Is if you start coming in controlling and
Hmm.
you're not facilitating that connection, then you lose autonomy, right? They feel like they're being controlled or coerced or
Yeah.
forced into something. Now I'm being treated like, like the child, and you've lost autonomy, which
Yes.
they all influence each other. We say there's a domino effect within your basic psychological needs. If you start infringing on someone's autonomy, most likely that's going to hurt or thwart also their needs for connection or relatedness,
Yeah.
and to a certain extent competence. But yeah, I mean, you basically just hit on all three of those basic psychological needs from motivation theory, which is like that's the foundation of it all. That's why does it make sense to give objective feedback as opposed to judgmental feedback, right? Why do you want to give focus on behavior or objective examples and feedback? Why do you actively listen and have empathy? It's to support. It's supportive of the psychological needs.
And you want to point to facts. And that's why whenever I have a client say they have a poor attitude, I say, how do you know what their attitude is? Well, I see what they're doing. I say, good. You see what they're doing. You focus on the observable behaviors, the specific incidents, and you don't infer or imply attitude. Because I can fake that I'm feeling good about being here when inside me, I don't want to be here. But if I'm a good enough actor, I can pull it off having the right attitude. But if I show up late for work, I leave early, I take long lunches, I turn in careless work, then those are behavioral things that indicate they may have an attitude problem, but you can't coach attitude. You can only coach behaviors.
That's all. Spot on. You're preaching to the choir.
So the challenge is with the small business owners is convincing them that it's worth their time.
And money.
Time is money. It's there.
That's true. Yeah, yeah.
And in business, every minute you're not spending getting work or doing work. You're steering the work. You're guiding people. You're enhancing people. You're training people. I've got two
Yeah.
mastermind groups of business owners. The next topic in February is why training is important, and I'm coaching them that your plate is full because it always is. Your plate is full. Why aren't you delegating? Well, nobody can do it as good as I can do it. That's reason number one they don't delegate. I might as well do it myself because I can do it
Yeah, be
quicker
faster.
than I can
Yeah.
teach it. Yeah. So, well, that's true the first time, maybe the second time, but about the 13th time.
Right.
So, identifying the skills needed for the job, assessing people against those skills, and developing targeted training by person is how you get people's self confidence up.
Yeah, well, and it's, I think for business owners, identifying what are the things that they truly can't delegate, that only they can do, like the visionary type
Yeah.
stuff, the strategic type
Mhm.
stuff, versus the stuff that they can do only because just no one else, they haven't spent the time to train. And it's, you don't have time to do that. Well, you don't have time not to do it, because what's going to happen in 3 months from now when you're trying to, well, you're going to be stuck doing that because that has to get done, and you're not going to be able to do the stuff you should be doing. It's the whole, I think, working in the business versus working on the business,
The
right?
old Michael Gerber quote. Absolutely. You want to work on your business. That's the only thing you're the only one that can do. You can
Yeah,
bring on people to assist you, but you're responsible for the why the company exists and where the company's going.
yeah,
Why are you scheduling your own appointments? Why don't you put it in a tool like Calendly? Little things like that. But if you really want true hard delegation, you want to delegate things in a responsible way, not an abdication. And the second question in my delegation: do you have what you need to perform? Well, I don't know how to use the CRM. I don't know how to the lingo the lingo that this client uses. I don't understand it. Well,
right.
back in the day when bookstores were vibrant, I used to go when I was in the corporate world. I would have different clients, and the first thing I'd do is I'd go down to the bookstore and buy a dictionary on mortgage terms if I was supporting the mortgage department, on investment banking terms if I was supporting the investment banker, on operations. What's operations lingo? Six Sigma, lean, all those things. You have to learn the language. And if you don't know that, you can train people on it. That's my point. That you have all this knowledge. Your job is to be like, transfer your knowledge and background into this person's head over time. Now that 10-80-10 split, I mentioned delegation, that's nirvana. Most time it's 25-50-25. And it's sporadic. It's not, here's, now go forth and work. Let's check in, have the right safety net. But when you have people that don't have the confidence because they don't know, and they're not going to self-start, they're not going to teach themselves, they're going to, what was the book? I'm trying to, 1 Minute Manager and the Monkeys. Have you read that?
Well, Blanchard has a lot of, he's the 1 Minute Manager is a monkey on my
Monkey
shoulder.
on my shoulder, yeah, Blanchard, yeah. I have a hard time
Yeah.
remembering
Yeah.
authors. But why do the monkeys keep
Yeah.
coming back? Because you're not satisfying their questions and you're taking it back.
Right. Yeah. No, I use that expression now too. Is like if you take on a tasker yourself, you've just taken the monkey on your shoulder and now you're walking around with it.
Yeah. And a lot of managers are afraid to walk through their own companies because they'll pick up monkeys on the way back to their office.
Right. And that's a skill, is learning how to, instead of taking the monkey on your shoulder, like, oh, all right, let me call so-and-so and I'll work that out, is like, no, enable them. Hey, do you know so-and-so? I can introduce you maybe, but or just, hey, reach out to so-and-so and you talk to them and work it
Right.
out. Monkey is not on your shoulder anymore.
When people come to me the third time with a question, which happens a lot, I don't answer it. I just say, oh, what do you think you should do? Well, I think we should do ABC. I said, why'd you bother me to ask a question to slow you down? You already knew the answer. And I'm building their self-confidence. Whether or not I have confidence in them is not relevant. Do they have confidence in themselves? Do they have the ability to do it? The confidence.
Yep. Yeah. It's self-efficacy. So, that's exactly situational leadership, right? Is that you have directive and supportive.
Yes.
We call it, with Dr. Zagarmi, we call it focused and inspiring leadership styles. It's a similar thing. But if somebody has low ability, then they need more direction.
Exactly.
And if they ask that question, and so it's the leader's job to understand and know, or to figure out and diagnose, are they asking me this because they don't have the ability and I need to provide them more direction, either showing, telling how, or setting deadlines or goals or whatever? Or is it a confidence, efficacy, or a motivation quality issue? In which case, you don't need me to tell you. You need collaboration. You need, support, encouragement, empowerment. Say, hey, you got this. You did it before. You've done this before. You can do this, or whatever it is. I love that. Is just throwing the question right back to them. Well, what do you think we should do?
And I'll even
Right?
sometimes.
And you'll find out really quick.
You remember
What?
we've talked about this. I believe you know the answer. What would you do if I wasn't here to ask?
Yeah, and if they don't know the answer, then if it's more probably an ability thing, and if they do, you egg it out of, or urge it out of them, then
And
it's,
the
it's
manager
a
or the leader is responsible for instilling that knowledge so they increase their confidence. The other factor we really hadn't touched upon, and I think there's some words in that are a little bit different, but fear is unfortunately an incredibly strong motivator. And it's not in a positive way, and it's not intrinsic.
No, external.
It's external,
It's an
100%.
external motivator.
But one of the things in listening to the book you recommended is that money is a fear motivator.
Can be.
Well, here's why I believe it is that we earn money, we create a lifestyle, we create obligations, we live in a nicer house than we did before, we drive a nicer car than we did before, we go on vacations we weren't able to do before. Those become a minimum acceptable standard of living. And if I don't continue to produce, I'm going to have less money. My lifestyle is going to deteriorate to where it was. That's a fear driver. And that's why I think money is a fear motivator, because you want to keep your standard of living, which requires money. So that's why, that was just a thought I had this week reading that book. I said, that really kind of changes. I had an executive once. We changed our management, our executive incentive plan to a biannual plan. In other words, we would award you $200,000, but we're going to pay out 50% of it this year, defer 50% next year. And you'll get it next year if your performance is sustained. So there's a fear factor. Mm-hmm. But I had a guy call me, and this guy made well over 7 figures. I mean, he was very successful and measured by that. And he said, you don't understand. You can't just cut my bonus because I use that. I need that to live on. Their lifestyle had gone to a 7-figure need.
Yeah.
And to me, that's interesting. But that when he called me and said, look, you don't understand. I got bills to pay. Private school tuition alone is, and I said, okay, that's a totally discretionary decision. With free public education in this country, you want to save $100,000 a year, put your kid in the local high school.
Yeah, that's equity over equality, I think, to a certain extent. But it's interesting. So I would say that money can certainly be a fear motivator, external, a threat. That's almost, and that's like the fear, the loss of money, yes, or the level of quality of life that you've lived, moved up to as you've made more money. But money can also be used as a reinforcement of the psychological needs if it's done in a way that's supportive of them. So for example, and Dan Pink talks about this. This is one of my favorite things out of his book. I personally feel like he oversimplified the self-determination theory a little bit, and he called it autonomy, mastery, purpose, as opposed to autonomy, relatedness, and competence. But he talks about if then versus now that rewards, yes, right? And so if and money, and there's some great studies on this that have looked at money is not directly or inherently an external or an intrinsic motivator in and of itself. It's the why behind it. Why do you want that money? Well, I want that money because if I don't have it, I'm going to lose my quality of life. I'm going to have to send my kid to the public school and, blah, blah, blah. Like, well, why?
Yeah.
But if you look at it that way, then yeah, that's an external threat, right? But if it's a now that reward or recognition, then it's, hey, you've been working so hard, you've made a lot of progress, and I want you to know that and recognize that, and I want to recognize you with this money or this bonus or whatever. Dr. Zagarmi had a great story that he would tell. He did this. I wasn't there, but he was at I think it was a Chick-fil-A or something. Mm-hmm. He was eating at a restaurant, and the whole time he was eating, he was watching this kid, right, probably 16, 17, just mopping the floor, yeah, and cleaning the floor. And he said this kid was he was on it. He was thorough. He was, getting every corner. He was into it. He was in flow. And he was just super impressed, right? Because you don't see that kind of work ethic all that often, especially in a younger kid at a fast food place, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And so when he left, he stopped the young man and basically said, hey, I want you to know I really appreciate what you were doing there. Like, you're just working so hard and you're in it and you're doing a great job, and I want to give you this. And he gave him $100, right? And it's, you'd think, well, that's an external thing, right? And there's a fine line, because now all of a sudden, if he starts thinking in his head, well, shoot, if I keep doing this, mopping this well, then I'm going to get another $100 mm-hmm. from somebody. Mm-hmm. Well, now all of a sudden that task has become an extrinsically motivated task. But I think the way that he did it, it's not reasonable to expect that. It was more about recognizing the competence, the fact that he was making a difference in creating connection.
And the drive, to borrow Pink's term, I think that the way it's communicated, and I really appreciate your attentiveness, your pride in your work. You're doing it for getting, oh, by the way, here's $100 for that recognition. 3 years from now, he'll remember the conversation. I think it was $100 they gave me. Maybe it was 50 or 200. I don't remember what the amount is, but they'll remember that conversation. And yeah, one of the things I'm working with my clients now is infusing their corporate values into their operations, not just tacking them on the wall like Enron did. If you're familiar with Enron, we could talk about that another time, but they had these great principles: transparency, integrity. Well, that's the opposite of what they did. I've got a tool where you array your values. You have statements about the values and behavioral examples about the value. when you're giving out bonuses or merits or anything, you reference those 3 or 4 core values for your company of how you operate. And you did extremely well or not well in these values. And as a result, your bonus is more or less than you thought it should. But you focus on why I'm giving you the money. And in your highly creative, innovative, problem solving, that's going to bring value. Now, if I'm a data entry operator, I'm not going to be motivated by the work regard. So pay me a piece rate, because I'm not coming to work for any other reason except to take home more money. I know this is boring work. There's no dishonorable work. But one of the biggest functions back in the day where everybody wrote checks was check encoding. High turnover position, and all you did all day long was key numbers. That's all you did. Check stop, you key it. Then you key it twice. Yeah. Check stop, you key it twice. Another check comes. You didn't even look away. There's no way that job's going to be intrinsically motivated, period. It is so dumbed down that there's no emotional value to the work. And we tried, you don't want, I had a $10,000 error on a check process one time. The $100 check, they put it through for $10,000. Caused me a lot of problems. So, but those are, again, I think, in your low, redundant, focused jobs, I think piece rate is a great motivator, because they come to work to get more money. That's their why. They don't come to encoding and data entry to change the world. Now, if I'm designing the next great, I don't know if you saw that building called the Wrapper, WRAPPER, down in near Irvine. It's an unbelievable architectural and structural engineering building because there's no internal support.
Oh, wow.
So if I'm the architect who said, hey, I've got this challenge, I want to come up with a building that's completely open space, that's 16 stories tall, well, let's work with the structural engineers and let's come up with something really unique. And they created a building with an exoskeleton instead of a skeleton. Mm-hmm. It's really cool. You mentioned Chick-fil-A, there's one around the corner from me, where the creativity is amazing. They took an old landmark restaurant, been around since the 50s, converted that into a Chick-fil-A that doesn't look like a Chick-fil-A. It kept the historical flavor. Those kind of creative things, there's no way you can put a dollar on. The people
right. No, and if you try to, you're going to just squash any creativity. Totally agree. And the research shows that, right?
Absolutely.
The mundane, the more skill that's involved, the more creativity, all that, the more power there is in intrinsic motivation. But that's where task variety and stuff come in as well.
Yes.
But I want to keep going, but we've kind of already gone over time in terms of where I've been trying to keep these podcasts. We'll have to just have you come back on, and we'll have another conversation. But I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. I thought this was great. There's some great stories in here, so I hope people find it value added. As we wrap, is there anything, I don't know if you're actively looking for clients or anything, but is there any, if people want to get a hold of you or you want to plug anything about your services?
I appreciate that. I'm always interested in helping that business owner achieve their success, achieve their dream by aligning their team. And that's, when you have that alignment, when you have that engagement, then you're going to be successful. So I'm always looking for clients that are open to my approach. It's not about having the right posters and the right documents signed. That's necessary, but that's not why I do what I do. So yeah, I'd love any small business owner who goes, I'm just frustrated, nobody seems to get it. That's when I can help them.
Cool. And how's best to get in touch with you?
Answers@thehrguy.biz is my email.
Okay,
website,
perfect.
thehrguy.biz.
Nice. All right, good. And I'll put it in the description in the YouTube video and the podcast description.
Thank you, and I appreciate your time.